Welcome to the last video on this channel for 2023. 2024 is going to be a pretty momentous year in a number of different areas. What better to do at this point than to take a solid and sober look ahead to what's likely to be coming our way. In fact, it's going to be a year that is significantly defined by a number of highly important elections, starting with Taiwan, then India, Europe, the UK. Sure, there was another one. What was it again? Oh yeah, that's right, the United States. For very different reasons, all of these promise to have some pretty solid significance for the world going forwards. So let's take a very quick canter through them all and see what's there to be found. Taiwan is the first significant country that will be seeing geopolitically important elections in just a couple of weeks. Of course, these elections are most significant less because of who will win and what their policies will be towards running Taiwan, but how the result may be influenced by and how it may provoke a reaction from China. China constantly has military operations being carried out in Taiwanese space, constantly prodding and reminding everyone that they are there. The Taiwan government has said that it is being actively targeted by Chinese disinformation efforts online that are seeking to influence the election. Be rather surprising if they weren't. Analyses of the targets of such activity suggest that China is backing the Kuomintang candidate Ho Yi-hu while attacking the Taiwan People's Party's candidates, and there's no big surprise in that. Such very specific attacks go hand in hand with a rolling softer program and seeking to promote a positive image of China within Taiwan, which has been ongoing. So, for instance, subsidizing or paying for borough chiefs from Taiwan to travel to the mainland where they are wined and dined and shown aspects of China designed to encourage pro-unification sentiments. Since the news of those visits came out, it's been hard for the government to take action on them, simply because so many borough chiefs, it turns out, have now taken part. It would end up being a major purge that would look very much like political persecution. So who's going to win the actual election? Right now, it is too close to call. It was certainly previously taken as read that the ruling pro-independence DPP would glide to victory. But whether because of China's efforts, whether because of campaign missteps, the polls have narrowed significantly over the course of the campaign. DPP leader William Lai was still just ahead of the Beijing-favoured Kuomintang in the latest polls, but really not by that much. The thing is, if China has been flexing its massively larger muscles and saying that an attempt to go for actual independence will lead to war, and then you have a candidate promoting pro-independence views, then his opponents will and have been go big on arguing that if he is elected, if that party is elected, security and stability will be the cost. Lay's position that standing firm and deepening alliances with the West to provide backup, not looking especially solid right now as Western resolve on Ukraine falters and if the US gets distracted with its own internals, as it seems likely to do. So what if the upset is achieved and a more Beijing-friendly party is elected? Probably nothing overnight, but the Chinese program of persuasion will definitely go up several notches, and the aim of bringing people round to the idea that reunification has become inevitable, so it's best to do it quietly and peacefully. That will all become so much harder to resist. Next up, India. India increasingly matters. It's now the most populous country in the world, having taken that crown over from China a few months ago, and it's an emerging global power. A lot of that comes down to the vision and charisma of Narendra Modi, and for a variety of reasons, Modi seems currently to be the one who genuinely is coasting to re-election. I mean, 78% of Indians surveyed just last month approved of Modi's job performance. He has a plus 60 net approval rating. Those are the sort of figures that any leader would love to have, and Western political leaders can only dream of. Upsets are always possible in elections, but this would be the biggest upset and biggest surprise of them all if it were to happen. And it makes a difference because, distinct arguably from all the leaders that came before him, Modi is seen as having raised India's status on the global stage. He's seen as projecting the country's growing confidence and strength abroad, and that may well start to act as something more of a counterbalance to the would-be world leader China, and all of that process started with Modi. Then we have Europe. During the last 6 months, we've started to see inevitable challenges building to the European project. Now, that's likely to be given a turbo boost by a European Parliament election cycle that is on track to deliver a very differently constituted Parliament, particularly with a growth in support for parties on the populist right, and indeed even a rising tide, dare I say it, of Euroscepticism. Whether this reaches the degree where it starts to push major changes in topic areas such as Ukraine, such as Israel and Gaza, green policies and the economy, well, that all hangs in the balance. It's not guaranteed that the coalition to the right will have any sort of a steady majority. They will certainly have a lot more power and influence, and a strong platform to push back against plans that the EU has previously presumed strong support for. Indeed, the last few months have seen quite a bit successful pushback against such plans. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is probably going to be reappointed. It's not guaranteed. If she wasn't successful, it would blow the process wide open because there's no then obvious other successor. How will any changes affect the EU's relationship with China will be a key question. If a Trump second term in the US becomes reality, and assuming he backs up with the America First policy that he's famous for, and a general note of scepticism and hostility towards Europe, the push will be stronger for the EU not to follow America into a strongly confrontational anti-China stance, but to play both sides. The UK election, we don't know exactly when it will be because the timing is in the gift of the Prime Minister, but it mostly has to be sometime in 2024 unless he leaves it to the very last minute. And in many ways, it's likely to be a formality because unless something truly remarkable happens, the Conservatives are going to get a kicking. We don't know whether that will mean a majority Labour government, which is certainly possible since the Scottish Nationalists have been in self-destruct mode all year, or whether there will be some sort of progressive coalition. What there won't be is any dispute about the election process. I predict this now. Whoever loses will accept the result and go quietly. So the election will simply be about what it's meant to be about, the choice of leadership for the country, not some potential massive challenge to the system of democracy itself. Given our propensity to import American things, shouldn't be taken entirely for granted, but it is still the national norm, fortunately. And then the open question will be how centrist or radical will an incoming Labour government be? Since they'll be facing some difficult economic circumstances, major geopolitical challenges, how competent will they be? My expectation is they will change a lot less than many of their own supporters would wish and their opponents would fear. Starmer wants to be the pragmatist by all appearances. The key question will be, if they have a slim majority, will it be the radical leftist flank that gets to throw its weight about to push him to do more than he would wish? Well, that flank is much diminished over the last few years, so possibly not. If he ends up in a coalition, will that involve promising another referendum on proportional representation? Would that go any differently to the last time? Probably not. Would the coalition partners be the radical flank? Maybe. But none of these are seismic questions on a world scale, because when it comes to support for Ukraine, position on China, interest in promoting Britain as a centre for innovation, net zero climate policies, none of those are likely to change very much pre- and post-election. Could the Tories pull off a comeback the way they did against Labour in the 92 election? Nah, I think it highly unlikely. Now, on one level, you might say that's unfair, because the Tories lost support from a period of government that was under Johnson and his successor described as chaotic and incompetent. But Rishi Sunak has brought the competence back to a large degree, at least at a basic level. But the polls have not been remotely influenced by that. They state the intention to give the Tories a stupendous kicking as soon as the opportunity presents itself. It is much more like 1997 than 1992, for all that Keir Starmer does not have the electoral assets that Tony Blair had then. In 1997, the electorate had just been sitting there seething and frustrated and waiting until they could kick the incumbents out. And when they're in that mood, what follows is usually pretty dramatic and pretty unambiguous. Don't see any signs that suggest that's not what's about to happen. Now, that will be a major moment in UK political life, a big change in some ways, but possibly the least consequential election on the list in terms of how much difference it'll really make on the world stage. And then we get to the United States. In the coming months, I think the expectation remains the candidates will be confirmed as the slate that almost nobody wants. Biden versus Trump, the rematch. It is almost certain that Trump's position on the ballot will be confirmed by the US Supreme Court, overturning the recent verdicts that struck him from several primaries. And it's likely that regardless of all the current court cases that are stacked up against him, probably even because of them, his position as candidate for the GOP will be confirmed. The Democrats don't seem to have the will to challenge their own weak incumbent, so assuming that nothing goes haywire in the process in the run-up, we will have arguably a nail-biter of an election. Who will win in what's expected to be a close race? And more to the point, will the loser accept the result? If not, will the rejection just follow legal courses like challenging it in court? Or will the foundation of the system start to crumble under the weight of two parties that have dug themselves in so deep they will no longer accept the victory of the other side? This is something we discussed before. There's nothing new to be said, certainly been no good news since we discussed it last time. It really is the huge question that hangs over 2024 that nobody can answer. The fact that things have reached a pivotal, dangerous moment, that is not really disputed by anybody that I've seen. The point is, I don't see that America can recover from the difficult moments that it's experiencing until and unless it has a cathartic release moment. Now, that could be a civil war, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, it would definitely be a political crisis, almost certainly a constitutional crisis, almost certainly a degree of internal conflict, but that could be minimised if you got your act together. And it might be next year, or it might be one of these things where it looms, drags itself painfully, slowly into full view, even over the course of decades. You know, the shadow of the first American Civil War loomed for quite a long time before it finally burst into reality. Growing polarization, step by step. You think it can't get any worse, but it does. A provocation, a step back, another provocation. But the ultimate problem doesn't go away. It's not resolved until the crisis creates the circumstances where it can be so. The thing is that America's enemies will take advantage regardless of what form the conflict takes. But how they're able to do that will differ. If America was actually collectively foolish enough to enter a shooting civil war, and to do so quite quickly, the extreme scenario in other words, you could easily see this would result in China feeling emboldened to move on Taiwan quickly while it had the opening. Anything less than that, then China's exploitation of America's weakness will probably be on the ratchet principle, step by step, challenging a little more, retreating a little less every time, until its growing dominance starts to make its desired outcomes have the aura of inevitability. And America will have nothing to offer in response unless and until it can resolve its fundamental internal problems. It'll just have to hope that China's own problems become so uncontrollable that it disrupts itself. Now, it could happen. It's an authoritarian regime. They make mistakes because nobody dares feed bad news back up the chain of command, for one thing. But if that's your main hope for the future, that the other side conveniently messes up when you're highly vulnerable, it's not a great strategy, let's face it. So those are some of the key elections that are going to have a big impact on what comes afterwards. And no, of course, I didn't include the Russian election, which is a laughable charade with a predetermined outcome. And then, of course, yes, there are many open questions about 2024 that are not election-specific, such as will the Ukraine-Russia war be concluded in 2024, for instance. But then the answer to that and many similar questions will certainly be influenced by some of those election results, one way or another. So there it is. Interesting times are on the way. Here's hoping that you are facing them with a degree of confidence and optimism in the human race's stubborn determination to overcome, because history has seen us do that over and over again, and I'm sure we can pull it off this time as well. Happy New Year to you all. See you in 2024.